Welcome to Surviving Saturday, a podcast about holding on to hope in the midst of life's difficulties, disappointments, and dark seasons.
Times like that remind us of the agony and despair the followers of Jesus felt on the Saturday of Easter weekend, in between the Friday on which he was crucified and the Sunday on which he rose from the dead.
That Sunday forever changed the way that humans can relate to God. But what does it look like to be honest about the very real pain we experience in the in-between?
To fervently cling to hope in the God who promised us his peace and his presence, at times when he feels distant or even cruel.
I'm Wendy Osborne, a licensed counselor in Charlotte, North Carolina.
And I'm her husband, Chris, a marriage mediator, conflict resolution coach, and trauma-informed storywork coach.
Join us each episode for authentic conversations about how life not turning out as we'd expected has created the contextual soil for the growth of a tenacious hope in the resurrection and in a God who is still making all things new.
Hey there, folks, and welcome back to another episode of Surviving Saturday with Chris and
Wendy.
Yay, we're here with you, and today is going to be part 3 of our 3-part series about couples doing story work together. If you listen to the last couple of episodes, the whole idea we were discussing was how it can be very beneficial and powerful and transformative in a marriage when both spouses in a couple are willing to do story work and are doing story work and actually want to try to do it together. And we talked about some of the benefits of that, the hope of that. And as we described, the hope of it is, can each of you learn to see the other person that you're in a relationship with an eye for what they have endured, what they've experienced? Can you have a growing respect for the stories that they've lived through that have been what formed their ways of seeing themselves and their ways of seeing the world, their way of showing up in the relationship? Or as Wendy said it kind of succinctly, can you let the story of the other person's life break your heart so that you have compassion for them, even when you encounter a place of some resistance, reactivity, conflict, difficulty? Can you learn to see, oh, I know what's behind that because they were harmed a certain way, they experienced life a certain way in their family of origin. And of course, the tricky part about that is before you can really be able to do that for the other person, what we've experienced and what we think there's a lot of good teaching that supports is you kind of have to be able to let your own story break your own heart. You have to have that compassion and wisdom for yourself in order to then be able to try to give that to the other person. It's a delicate, tricky process. We would say we've been at it, 20 plus years at this point. And we keep learning and experiencing new levels of what it means. And we would go back to our 30-something-year-old selves and say, oh, gosh, just hold tight. You don't even know half of what you're going to need to know, want to know, to be able to meet each other and love each other in a different, better way. So this part 3 is going to focus on what are the challenges, what are some questions that arise when we talk about doing story work as couples. And I want to start with just, Wendy, do you kind of speak to what couples are even appropriate for doing story work together? It may not be for everybody. What's the kind of the grid that you look through, or what are the criteria that you apply in kind of deciding, is this something that would be beneficial for a particular couple that you're working with, or that might be wanting to come do an intensive with us or something?
Yeah. So, I think the first thing that I think of is both people have to have some degree of hope for the marriage and a desire to make it better and more than it is. And we've said before, and I think we talked about it with Dan in the interview when he was here a little while back, God always has more in mind for our marriages, no matter how good we would consider them to be. So I think both partners, if they're going to do story work, need to have a sense of hope, be willing to work on the marriage, even if they're currently separated, but they have a desire for more.
And when you say hope, you're not talking about like optimism, like, this is going well, we just need fine tuning. They can be in a place of, this is really hard. we are stuck. We don't like where we are,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to persevere. I want to figure this out. I
Mm-hmm.
want to be able to learn and grow,
Even,
even though it might be a mustard seed.
yeah, it may even be I want to do this. But even that to me is a glimmer of enough hope that they're willing to show up. So that's one thing. Also, they've got to have enough safety and a sense of trust with each other and with the coach or the counselor that they're engaging in the work with. So they've got to feel emotionally safe again enough.
Okay.
Yes.
And say a little bit more about what you mean by safe enough. It's not going to be a perfect. They're getting along and they're chill all the time. But what would you say is safe enough?
So safe enough is that they come back to a place of believing that they want more for the marriage, their spouse wants more for the marriage, and that the other person is for them and they are willing to be for the other person.
Okay. And so I guess that means, and this sort of gets someone into my territory in the legal work that I do, but if you have a situation where there is active, say, physical abuse or financial abuse or emotional abuse that's still going on, that's probably going to be a little bit of a red flag.
Well, those people ethically wouldn't be considered candidates for marriage counseling of any sort
Yeah.
because honesty would be too costly.
Yeah. And what I hear you saying is it's got to truly be safe if for each person to be vulnerable. If there is a significant risk that that vulnerability is going to be weaponized or misused,
Mhm.
you definitely don't want to try to delve into that territory.
Well, and I think that brings up another issue of each person also has to feel safe within themselves. So a lot of times what will happen is couples will tell me they went home after a session and one says to the other, I can't believe you made me look that way. I can't
Um,
believe you told that story. Why would you describe it that way? And so each person has to have enough internal safety. And that would again be the case for marriage counseling that they can endure the process.
Yes. Um, and so that kind of ties into another that criteria then is they really need to have some level of willingness to do their own
Hmm.
individual work. Doesn't
Yes.
mean they love it all the time, doesn't mean they're great at it necessarily, because nobody, and present company included, nobody starts off super well attuned or astute about our own stories. That's part of why it takes a trained counselor or story work coach or um, recovery type in intensive setting because we can't tell our own stories
Hmm.
honestly. Really, that's part of the challenge we're dealing with. We're all narrating what we experienced as we were formed to do. And
Hmm.
as we made sense of it at the ages we experienced different things, which when we go back and sort of revisit it as adults, we start to realize, oh, that's what my 10-year-old brain decided about this
Hmm.
or about life because it had
Yes.
to survive. I needed to separate people into good and bad, black hat, white hat categories in order to make sense of it. And it turns out the story is way more complex than that when we
Yes.
revisit it. So everybody's got to be willing to do some of their own work. So what would you say then? I imagine you encounter frequently when you have a couple and one of them has begun doing story work and started connecting some dots and realizing, oh my gosh, there is really benefit and value in this. But the other spouse is resistant for some reason. Either they're hostile and say, I don't even understand it, and or they say, but I don't have a story. You do, but I don't.
Hmm.
Or they say, I just don't understand how that connects to today.
Hmm.
That seems like it's spending time in the past. Kind of talk about that a little bit.
So I just first want to honor the deep loneliness that that spouse feels. The one who is doing the work and longing for their spouse to join them.
Yes.
So there's a lot of loneliness. There's a lot of grief. Like they want their spouse to join them, to know them, and to be willing to be uncomfortable for the sake of growing the marriage.
And it can be really challenging for that person because, in a sense, what's happening is they're waking up to or learning to navigate their feelings. And in some sense, it's going to be hard to name that desire
Mm-hmm.
and that it's not being met, but not just go into compulsive ways of trying to fix that situation.
Right.
To sit in that sort of loneliness of, oh my gosh, I think more is available for us.
Mm-hmm.
I can see it, but also have to reckon with their powerlessness to not be able to make it happen for the other person.
Right. And that is likely storied itself. Like, when has this spouse who is beginning to see things that formed them and desire that their marriage include this kind of work, what are their prior experiences with being powerless? And so that is likely going to indicate the way they deal with their spouse when their spouse will not listen to them to say, come and do this with me.
And I think we identify, we were talking about a little bit beforehand this morning on, we both experienced seasons where maybe one of us felt like, oh my gosh, I'm learning something. This is helpful. If we really did this, it would change us.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, at least in my case, when that happened for me, I I think I became kind of desperate and demanding in a different way
Mm.
because I got a taste of, oh my gosh, learning about some of our unhealthy relational patterns. To me, it started kind of making sense, connecting dots, but then I kind of became sort of pushy or demanding, like, for you should see this too, and you need to see this the same way, and you weren't there at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've experienced the flip side other times
Mm-hmm.
where, like, you're seeing me stuck in a place, and you can see there might be a way out, and I'm not embracing healing enough.
Right. And I think, if a couple is already with a coach or a counselor at this point, an astute helper can see that the stories of both people are playing out right there in this conversation, where one feels the need to power up because they likely have contended with a lot of powerlessness in their life. The other one may be used to having their autonomy overridden. And so you're playing out a cycle that is very familiar to both.
Yeah, and it's hard because the good part about real deep healing in processing your story is it feels super liberating.
Mm-hmm.
When you start seeing, oh my gosh, this explains
Mm-hmm.
so much.
Mm-hmm.
I always wondered why I struggled with chaos, disorganization, distraction, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can understand there's a power in that. That's really good. You want that energy because
Mm-hmm.
you have this vision of, I don't have to live the way that I've always lived.
Mm-hmm.
But that can then you sort of have that energy of the new convert of, you want everybody to, like, get some of this, come
Yeah.
on. And then you come in and can be, at least we've experienced this, you sort of can be pushing that on your spouse, without regard for where are they in their
Mm-hmm.
story, what are they ready to name, what are they feeling safe with, and they're going to possibly be feeling a number of things. One is your sort of new, redeemed, more alive, more present self is going to be disruptive
Mm-hmm.
because you're not entering into the old patterns of relating the same
Right.
way, and it's going to probably upset them,
Mm-hmm.
and they have, again, as you said, many storied ways of how they're going to respond to that. It may be intimidating. They may feel shame, like, well, I can never heal like that, but they won't say that. And so there's all kinds of tricky territory, or things you have to navigate here. And so you have to watch out for, if somebody is doing the work, watch out for that demanding. It can be, you have to see me this way, like I
Mm-hmm.
see me this way. Now you better also. That's not going to go over
Mm-hmm.
well. Or you have to do your work too. I know I went on a healing intensive recently with some other men, and everybody's in different places in the relationship, and different people are, wanting to go back, and like the drive that Dan always talks about, to go back to your family once you start realizing this stuff, and you want to kind of go in and set everything straight, and, like, be careful with that. Watch
Mm-hmm.
that energy, hold that. What would you say the invitation then, And the other thing that could happen is you could start despairing too. And if
Mhm.
the other person, you're doing work and the other person's not, you have to sit in that longer. So I think you phrased it really well when you spoke earlier to the invitation to the partner who's a little, more embracing of story work is grieve first.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. Like, there's so much grief that is going to have to be felt, experienced, endured, um, because what they hope for is not presently available.
Yes.
One thing that came up as you were talking is I've been working with a couple, and the man sees their dynamics in a different way. And he sees the roots of the way they deal with each other coming directly from the ways that they had to um, live inside their families of origin. So the roles they played. Okay. She carried the role of always having to make sure everyone else was okay and not having needs because there were too many needs in the family. So he is inviting her into healing, but deep in her bones, she feels this terror of having needs.
Mm,
And so she presents as saying, I don't understand why any of this is relevant. Okay. But I can see behind that resistance that she does not think it's okay to have needs because she's not sure they'll be met. And
yeah.
she will just be asked to sit with the pain of her own vulnerability.
Mm,
And so I think that, for this man, there's a lot of grief over the freedom that she cannot experience right now, grief over where he would like to be able to be closer to her, like join together for the sake of the marriage. Grief that he sees things she doesn't see, and he sees a way forward that she's not willing to see right now. And so it's really painful.
I think I'm reminded too of something that one of our counselors said early on that we both had to, like, it was kind of radical, but the idea of learning to wait well.
Yes.
Um, I remember hearing that and going, screw that. I don't
Mhm.
like waiting, period. Like,
Mhm.
I just read something or learned something, experienced something. This is the answer. Let's get it. Let's move it forward. You can hear my
Yeah.
energy rise.
Yeah.
And the idea of learning to wait well,
Mhm.
and trust and wrestle with God. That's where
Mhm.
when you're saying grief, that means wrestle with God. Oh, I want this for them. And I am more aware than I used to be of my powerlessness to make it happen.
Well, what you said made me think of, a dynamic between us. So I'll let you speak to your side, but I'll name it that some of your wounding has left you energized to fix things.
Yes.
Some of my wounding has led me to despair and hopelessness and a sense of why try.
Hmm.
And so those two things can really collide.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually helpful as you say that. I can connect that to because, like, in my family, the fighting was overt,
Mhm.
loud, unmistakable, and I was drawn into it as a combatant.
Mhm.
And part of my story is I was almost like, picture me at like a little 9 or 10-year-old self, but like referee,
Mhm.
mediator, communicator,
Mhm.
caregiver, combatant. So for me, my nervous system comes alive. Oh, there's conflict. I got this. I know how to do
Mhm.
this because I started doing it when I was young. Now that's not fully right. And I've had to learn, how to wield that energy rightly and well. It's some of what forms me and makes me a mediator and
Mhm.
have a
Mhm.
counseling mindset and
Yeah.
a coaching mindset today. And there can be this over energy of it is up to me to
Mhm.
fix this. And if I don't, nobody else will because
Mhm.
that's what it felt like.
Yes.
And a lot of how I've had to grow, in as a mediator and as a counselor is sometimes I have to sit and hold hope
Mhm.
and invite, but I
Mhm.
can't make
Yeah.
happen. And that desperation is the dangerous part, and
Mhm.
that it depends on me. Even when I'm
Yes.
mediating, I have to step back and go. I can't bring folks any farther than they're willing to go,
Yeah.
and I don't want to be a person who. There's a saying in mediation, like, are you going to twist our arms and twist people's
Mhm.
arms? So I'm like, I really don't want to. I
Yeah.
shouldn't. I'm going to invite you to see challenging things,
Yeah.
and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But same thing here in our work with couples, we can invite them to see things, and you hold out the hope and the possibility that this could be helpful if you do, but we can't make them see things.
Right. And we have to really deal with the issue of trust. Okay. So it may be less about the spouse's trustworthiness, although there's probably, none of us are fully trustworthy. But it may be less about that and more about the experience that one of them has had being unable to trust others' goodness.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
so some of my clients have come from homes where they were set up to trust in something only to have it ripped away or to be mocked
Ooh.
for believing in something. Okay, so you can imagine the kind of war that is. For them to trust. So I have a young man that I work with, and when he was little, his father invited him to consider building a tree house together. And he let his son draw pictures of exactly what he wanted. And they went to the hardware store and they started looking at what they would buy, and they went home and they wrote out a budget and showed it to the rest of the family and talked about where in the yard it would be. And so on the Saturday morning that they were to build the tree house, the son is all dressed. He's got his little overalls on. He's got his little toolbox. He comes out with the pictures, and dad starts laughing and says, "Did you really think we were going to build a treehouse?"
Oh my gosh.
Okay. So these kinds of events happened over and over in this child's life, this being the most extreme. Okay. But can you imagine the war it is for that now man to trust his spouse has anything good for him? And when his spouse fails him, he remembers just how foolish he is to believe that someone's goodness or promise of goodness toward him will ever come to fruition.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so there is so much work to do inside of him before we can get to him trusting his spouse in present day.
That makes sense.
Because those stories have such power over him.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I guess you do as a counselor. If you are working with each of them, and maybe you've seen them individually sometimes, or you've seen them together, but you're kind of getting a read on where are these formative places, what are the obstacles and barriers going to be, and you're going to have a better attunement to that, both because of professional training, but also because of your objectivity. Yeah. Like you're not in the spin with them.
That's
and so you're able to see it. And that we'll come back to that point in a little bit, the value of an outside empathetic witness. Sometimes that has to happen more either with you or with a recovery type group or a group setting before then taking it into the relational category. So the call, as we mentioned, if you're the person who's doing more story work, who's more bought in, the invitation also is then to experience change for your own sake. I know when I've been to a recovery week setting or an intensive, as I mentioned earlier, you leave, there's this energy like, oh my gosh, I'm being changed, but you really want the other person to see that. But the problem is the desperation to want them to see that. And I can relate to it. I did it so much. Oh my gosh, I'm different. I learned something. Hey, honey, get it. Look, I'm different. That is potentially going to feel, well, tell me, what did that feel like sometimes if that's how I kind of showed up, like I've got the answer, I'm different. Please see me as different. Could you read that? And what did that do in you?
Oh, well, now I see it and it breaks my heart because I can see that there is this desperation in you that was planted early of, will somebody see me and call me good? Like, look at me, at me.
Yeah,
you
that is so cool.
To me, it read as desperation that there was another thing wrong with me and my autonomy was going to be overridden again so that I could be fixed enough to be pleasing. Because my story is very different, that there was always something wrong that if I was ever to be chosen must be fixed. And it wasn't just like a single thing. It was like I experienced it as everything about me.
Yes, and I didn't know at that time that depth of level of your story,
Mm-hmm.
and was clueless that I was coming in, landing on that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, really, I remember getting somewhere along the line some good guidance of, hey, you're what you take, what you do. If you learn something that's new, that's helpful, that's great. Learn it, make
Mm-hmm.
it yours, do it for your own sake.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, and not as a means to an end to get what I want from you in the
Right.
relationship. And I remember I may have told this story in a prior podcast episode. I don't think I have, but I remember an episode or a men's retreat at Montreat with our
Mm-hmm.
church. And I remember there being something, pretty powerful said by the speaker. Um, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but it led to me in one of the quiet times going and just sitting kind of in the middle of that creek that flows from
Yeah.
Montreat.
Mm-hmm.
And
Lake Susan.
yes, exactly, the creek that kind of flows out of that. And I remember, just God just showing me everything you've learned has been a tool
Mm-hmm.
that you have taken to try to fix your marriage and what's going on in Wendy and what's going on in you and all. And can you just lay the tools down? Can you just be transformed? Just be different.
Mm-hmm.
Just operate, not to make sure somebody sees it
Yeah.
and you get the acclaim for it, or not. So you'll do your part, right? Because I brought a lot
Mm-hmm.
of that energy to just, well, I have to be this different person. I have to experience this healing, and trust. It may make things better. It may make things worse. Because that's the other thing. If when you run into the fact that your healing self is disruptive for the other person,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe not for reasons that you could understand, and certainly not for reasons that you're culpable for,
Right.
things like you don't see. But can you sit and can God be enough
Yeah.
to sit with you and help you just self-regulate and help you go, how do I wait well now? And how do I wait in an undemanding way?
Well, and that's where, having individual care, whether it's by the same coach or counselor or someone else, is really important because for some of us, we're not at a place where God Himself feels safe enough. And so that self-regulation may actually come from co-regulation with another human being who is empathetic and kind and can honor where this person is.
Well, and that is a good transition to another challenging place. Let's say you have a couple where both actually are willing to do some work and they're starting to do some good work, but both of their stories are really hard.
Mm-hmm.
There are, like you just described in our dynamic, things that we didn't even know we were landing on. There's more complexity. There's more darkness than either of them has woken up to. That can make it challenging to do it together as well, because you're both sort of learning this new territory, this new way of being at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like what you alluded to. They need to be getting individual care also,
Mm-hmm.
and that could be meeting individually with you, separate from their couple times. Or do you have a lot of people who are like they're meeting with you for couple work, but then they each have an individual therapist, or vice versa? Or
So I do have that. If if both individuals are willing, I will often work with each of them individually and then with them together. They have to feel completely safe and willing. The reason is then I know the stories. Whereas if one of them is meeting with another counselor, they can come back and tell me, and that's fine, but I may learn differently if I work with them individually than together. Now,
yeah,
more often what happens is the couple comes to the sessions together, even if we're only focusing on one of them. Because what I often hear from the other spouse is she never talks that much at home. Or I never heard him tell that story that way. I actually had no idea that's the way that thing went down with his dad.
yeah,
I had heard the story from his mother, and it was very different.
yeah,
So a lot of times couples appreciate getting to hear the story in a neutral situation without all the emotion. And that has a healing power. Like if I can hear your story as you tell it to a counselor and I'm not inflamed, you're not mad at me in the moment, so I'm not resistant, then it can draw a compassion for you out of my heart of, wow, I I've never thought about the story that way.
Well, and then there's that powerful moment because I know how you do this and I know how we do it when we do a couples intensive. It's not so other spouse. Do you see that? Do you get that? It's not a harshness.
No.
It's a lot of times it's like, what are you hearing? Is the how is this as you sit and listen to us have this dialogue? What is that doing in you? And people say some amazing
Yeah.
things. They are actually seeing it differently again because this neutral person and this trained person is drawing the story out with kindness
Hmm.
and with attunement because that's what we're trained to do.
Yeah.
And that's where we can't emphasize enough to have compassion on your own story, to see it rightly, to see yourself with kindness and curiosity. It really super, super important. It helps to have the empathetic witness of others. That is where
Hmm.
we have both would say we've experienced some of the greatest breakthroughs, healing is other people to sit with me in my story and go, that's really worse than you're playing it out to be. Do you see what you're doing with this? Or stop, whitewashing this or whatever, to enter into it and go, my heart is breaking, or I'm angry at this person in your story
Hmm.
because they are harming you and you're still making excuses for them or you're trying to minimize what they did and they're like, no, I'm angry, I am
Hmm.
pissed, and there's this freedom to go, maybe I could be too if I were allowed to, which I wasn't then.
Hmm.
So the empathetic witness of another person is huge, and the desire to have that other person be your spouse is a lovely one. It's a great
Hmm.
one. It can be what happens. It is a good end result of this,
Hmm.
but you can't get there too fast. You
Hmm.
can't make it happen. It may be you need to be experiencing this healing on your own with other people beside your spouse first to bear the sympathetic witness in a safe environment.
Hmm.
Then, as you grow in your own ability to have compassion and your own ability to regulate as you go into your story, then is when you sort of bring the couple together as
Hmm.
each of you is doing that. That's where the couple dynamic breakthroughs can start to happen. But
Hmm.
they're so I love that there is no one size fits all.
Yeah.
There's really tailoring it to each individual couple. Um, and so it may be they're doing couple sessions with you and they're breaking off individually. And then you have had we've had the privilege of some clients will come and do like an intensive weekend
Yep.
where we do more of this. And one of the advantages of an intensive is you can stay with it a little bit longer
Yep.
and do a deeper dive
A
and do
lot
more of
longer.
the, hey,
Yeah.
let's stay with you for an hour and then stay with the other person for an hour and then do some processing out of that. And you have that opportunity to hear those stories on a deeper level.
Yeah. And you can also, in that format, do some experiential exercises, because you just have longer.
Didn't we, in fact, in one intensive, we did a sand tray. Didn't you
Hmm.
do, we did sand trays
Yep.
with the couple.
Yep. So
Tell people what that is.
yeah. So sandry is just a modality of allowing a person to tell the story of what's happening using little miniatures, little figurines. So it's a way of telling the story a little bit more out of your right brain of how this feels to you than just thinking in terms of the way you would tell it in words. And so I've got hundreds of little miniatures that metaphorically represent different situations. Some are literal. There's people and there's animals and there's fences. But we give a person a prompt and ask, um, how would you represent this part of your life? So I've had children that have come out of foster care do it and describe the different houses they lived in. And so they might use fairy tale characters that were in charge of the different houses. This one, there was a witch. This one, there was a fairy, and just sort of I can get a sense of their internal world. But with at the couples intensive that you are referring to, we had each member of the couple have their own sand tray and create a visual of how their marriage looks to them.
Mm-hmm.
And she put herself as a superhero, holding every member of the family up above her head. And she said, I feel like I have to carry everyone.
Wow.
And her husband was stunned that that is the way it feels for her.
Yes.
And so there's even a way to have compassion if someone isn't merely telling, but they're showing this is what it's like. And you can see this figure straining to hold up an entire family. And you can imagine what it's like for her to be buckling under the pressure.
Well, and the visual image is helpful for some of us. Visual images mean more
Yep.
Than auditory. And they've got a picture that can kind of hold on to and kind of come back to. One of my favorite stories that I still remember where we saw some real healing happen, dots connected. There was a couple that came and described, different stories from their background. And one of them had said something to the effect of had gotten to tell stories of their a family member turning on them. A family member, kind of similar, not as bad as that treehouse story, which is awful, but similar setups, and only to be cut down. And they came back after, because we give them time to reflect in between sessions, but they came back for the last morning, and the person who had heard that other person's story said, I have realized from hearing that story, I've got to be the other person's ride or die. I've got to actually, when we're with his family, I've been joining with them in condemning him, making him feel small, left out. I've got to be his ride or die.
Yeah.
And it was so powerful. And then there was a flip side. The man had more compassion for the other person, because I did not know that when I bring all this energy in this way, I'm landing on that story of hers. And now that he's seen that story and entered into it with her, it's more, and we would say that's happened for us. There's ways that we tread more carefully because we know what delicate space it is.
Yes.
And so when it works, when it happens, it can be super helpful. And what I've enjoyed about it is you really never stop learning.
Right.
We've been privileged to do a group with some couples that we did an intensive with a couple of years ago, and several of us were invited to stay in a group together. We get together once a month, and we all enter in and do this together in a group context. And it's fascinating to watch how each couple gets to sort of be center stage and deal with, hey, here's where we are, here's where our stories are showing up and being frustrated. And the other couples can have insight, because everybody's doing work, can see, oh my gosh, I have compassion for you. I see this for you in a way that, again, the couple in the spin, when it's us, we can't quite see this, but somebody else coming and saying, do you get how this hits her? And they're reacting to it. And there's something really amazing that happens when you do that.
It's been so sweet and so effective because there's so much honor for where each couple is. And you can, if you surveyed the year and a half at least that we've done this, you'll see each couple in wildly different places.
Yes.
And, from beautifully connected to fully at odds to somewhere in the middle. And there's honor and no judgment. And there's no condescension, but more of I don't know where we'll be next time.
Yes.
And so that just creates a sense of safety, because all these places in marriage are normal. And the goal is that you walk the road of all that terrain together.
Yes. And I love that you use the word safety, because I was going to say that as well. I feel safe for us to come into that particular space and be raw and say, this is what happened this morning. And other people are doing this too. Even the couple that's leading it, has modeled that so well. This is live. This is real. This is not, remember when we weren't functional in our marriage and now we are. It's like, here's where we've grown and learned. And even as much as we've grown and learned, we still fall. We still fall back into it. But you're in a safe environment where nobody's trying to catch and say, oh, you're bad. Oh, you better do this. It's more, let me support you because I have walked with you and seen some of your story. I know where you've walked, and we can kind of call it back. And that's the hope of it. The last thing to speak to briefly, there still might be some people who just don't feel like they have a story. Like they are just like, I mean, my childhood was, as far as they are describing it, it was pretty good. What do you say when they're not resistant, they're not hostile, and they're not questioning? They're like, yeah, but I don't really have anything to say. She's got the dramatic story, but I really don't.
I would say there's something in that where they've never been allowed to have emotions or feelings, that they've just had to be okay. But the truth is, we all have a story because I believe God is writing one, but we're all raised by sinners as sinners in a very fallen world. And so all of us have experienced both beauty and brokenness. And so everybody has a story, but it may take a while and a lot of kindness and compassion and a lot of gentle curiosity to help a person be willing to step into what is theirs.
I'm always intrigued when I'll hear people who will say that's their story, that their childhood was pretty good, and they'll just sort of casually say, "I mean, my parents divorced," and just sort of bounce off. But but they co-parented really well, and we got through this. And I'm like, okay, but that did do something to you,
Yeah.
for there to be a rending asunder of the family that was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And some of the people I've worked with, their family wasn't together long.
Yeah.
They were very young when there was a divorce. Okay, that impacts you one way. Some of them were older, cognizant, aware, but there are feelings in there about that. And the way we often approach it is just to have some curiosity about, well, how did your family handle disappointment? How did you learn to deal with loss or separation anxiety, whatever? And a lot of times that's where paying attention to what the body knows is often helpful. Because what we're talking about is not just big, what some people say, big T trauma, like, oh, we had a death of a parent, or we moved across country and never saw our friends again. Some people did not have discernible big traumatic moments, but there may have been small losses, disappointment, places along the way, or ways that you were socialized and shaped.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be alive in this world
yes,
is to have experienced some level of pain and brokenness or trauma. Trauma is really just an event that overwhelms your nervous system's ability to cope. And so that can be, quite frankly, your parents tell you to stop playing video games when you're 4 and you don't want to stop.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've all had brokenness. And did we have care in it?
I often will hear somebody describe maybe, what are some words that describe either your relationship with this parent or that parent, or what did it feel like in the midst of a separation, divorce? And like one person said, I felt missed a lot. Like, oh, hey, there's more to really dive into there. What did you do with that being missed? What were you told to do? How did people react? Were you able to speak to? Were you allowed to articulate that you felt a certain way? Those things matter. That's what we're talking about. And so we would say to that person, be curious about your own story. One of the things we didn't say earlier that I think is a good note to end on also, both for people as you're going through this process, if you're going through together, or if you're the person who is doing story work and you're waiting on the other person to be, ready and willing, playfully be curious. Be curious with yourself. One suggestion that I've had recently and I'm trying to do is, gather some old photos from your childhood and just sit with them and see what comes to mind. What do you recall? I'm like, don't remember that scene at all, but be imaginative about it. And you can be curious with the other person, not over the pain and the hardest and the terrible stories, but be curious about the good formative stories. You learn things from the good parts of story as well. And there's
Who
something
was your
about
favorite teacher? Mine was Mrs. Gagstatter. But yeah, I mean, a lot of times it can start in present day of what are you feeling in your marriage is hard. And that can lead you back to stories that have formed you. But I love that idea of getting out photos of each of you when you were little and just being curious. Like, tell me about this birthday party and that Hot Wheel car set you got. Like, I want to hear.
And I promise there will always be something to learn, because you and I have known each other
40
40
years.
years. And we met when we were probably it's about 42 now. And we knew each other's families growing up, and we still continue to learn new details, new things, and see them in new ways. And so if you didn't meet until you were in college, then you got tons of stuff you can explore and learn. If you met dating in the Charlotte scene, then you got 20 plus, 30 plus years to go through. Don't think you're done. So we appreciate folks listening and being here for this episode. And if you are interested in exploring your story together as a couple, reach out to Wendy, reach out to us at Nurture Counseling. And we do plan to have more marriage-focused offerings coming.
That is on the short list.
And we have a wait list for intensives because those are everybody has to kind of schedule those and work those out in advance. I'm available to do story work with a limited number of people on a go-forward basis. But thanks for listening, and we will see you on the next episode. The Surviving Saturday podcast is brought to you by Nurture Counseling PLLC, a counseling teaching and training center based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. We help families flourish one story at a time. Nurture Counseling provides counseling intensive for couples, conflict resolution coaching, story work groups, seminars, workshops, and retreats to provide a safe and welcoming context for exploring the agonizing experiences of pain, brokenness, and evil that disrupt our lives, and that God often uses to nurture deeper trust and intimacy with Him and with each other. You can find us online at www.nurturecounseling.net.